This is the E-Commerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome to the E-Commerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, Head of Retail Marketplace Services at Acadia, alongside my co-host, Jordan Ripley, Director of Retail Operations, also at Acadia. We're joined today by one of our favorite, most frequent guests, a CPG whisperer, which I like a good title like that, Chris Perry of firstmovr. Today, he'll be talking with us about his brainchild for the ENDCAPS. It's a new industry awards that just kicked off a few months ago at the close of 2024. So we're going to dive in on the learnings that came from the grocery category award winners in the initial round of the awards. And we'll also talk about what's in store for the other categories and brands that compete for an ENDCAP award and dominance this year in 2025. So with that, hi, Jordan, and welcome, Chris. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much, both of you, for letting us come on. CPG Whisperers. I feel like this is like Game of Thrones, King of the Andals, and the First Men. I haven't earned all of these yet. One day, maybe I can, but this is awesome.
Congrats on the superlative. It's well earned.
I think that's something that we might need to do, Jordan, from here on out, is whenever we invite someone onto the show and we intro them, we need to have the superlative. I do feel like it just...
a dubbing. Maybe like a sword that we could sort of virtually knight somebody as they come on.
I do have a knight that holds my pen.
This Chris came prepared. I love it.
So maybe you're like the knight of the CPG round table and stuff. Okay. Focusing. What are we here for? All right. ENDCAP. Let's dig in and talk about a little inspiration for the awards that you've created. We all in our space have heard ENDCAP used. We're very familiar with what it means in a traditional retail setting. But I'd like to dig in on a couple things here. When it comes to ENDCAP Awards, what are they? Number one. And two, what inspired that choice of name?
It's a great question. So we had a lot of ideas for the name for this awards, from like shelfies to many other things. We wanted to pick something that had a premium feel to it because it really should recognize excellence. We don't want to be so formal and stodgy that it's not fun, because that wouldn't be in keeping with the first mover community and all of the partners that we have in this space. We want to be edutaining as well, but we thought this should feel formal and real and credible and exciting to earn at the same time. And we felt like there's also this opportunity, something that we feel very, I would say, deeply about, is this notion of omni-channel, which everyone knows and gets and acts as shoppers themselves, but yet it hasn't quite come together in the traditional CPG and or retail space. We've still got a lot of players in silos. There's still a lot of planning processes and I would say activation processes and measurement processes that haven't come together. So we thought ENDCAP was kind of nice because it's bridging an old world, right, the in-store world, to the new digital world. Encapsulates the fact that you're at the top or at the end of your category, the front of your category. You're the one worthy of being promoted, the featured captain, if you will, of the shelf. And these awards are really meant to create a way to recognize all of the years of blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into making the digital shelf not only a key strategy for brands to win online, but also to influence that in-store sales and ultimately your planogram placement long-term too, because to win in store, you need to be winning online with your key retailers. And to win online, you need to win the digital shelf. And I started in brand management first. So I'm a brand marketer first. And I've always been so surprised by how little the digital shelf was considered as such a driving force of success long-term. We all we check the box. And then when we talk about content or digital shelf excellence, there's kind of some rolled eyes like, yeah. But this is so important. And we wanted to make sure we honored those who are doing it well, but also educate everyone else on what they're doing well that they can do too, and really just empower everyone to keep raising the bar.
That's great.
Preaching to the choir here. I just have to say, this is my zone that I get so passionate and excited about. So I'm really excited for this.
Yeah.
Jordan, I know you were about to say something.
No, I agree. If I think about the award landscape and there's the sort of large legacy trade group awards like you have at Cannes, or you have the sort of channel specific awards, right? Like I can get an ANZ certified partner badge and that sort of thing. And so I'm wondering, when you were sort of first conceiving this idea of the ENDCAPS, where did you see the niche in the award landscape? And if we fast forward 12 months from now and this whole thing's wildly successful, like what changes in the industry from this award?
It's a great question. So there are some amazing awards out there today for, again, you mentioned Cannes. I mean, we're not yet on that level. We just started. We have high ambition long-term, but there's some amazing awards already out there, often for advertising, the creative, the marketing, shopper marketing, a lot of the, I would say, the media marketing strategy activation. There hasn't been anything to date on digital shelf and digital merchandising from a digital shelf perspective. And we started with PDPs as the most obvious and most important asset on this digital shelf within this digital merchandising realm. But it's not closed to brand stores, landing experiences, right? And we wanted to make sure that while we're starting with the CPG community as an obvious group that could tap into the best practices here, some of this really is on the retailers to take to the next level, right? I can only do what my retailer enables me to do. I can think outside the box, but there is a box. So I need that box to change or grow. Some of this is also intended to push that forward. But part of this too was to try to, maybe when you mentioned like there's different, almost if you had a spectrum of awards and certifications out there, arguably we're creating another axis. So it's a triangle in the sense that this isn't just one association's, one company's award or certification. It's multiple. It's an industry award brought together by multiple partners and judges from across the space in an objective way. By all means, we're all subjective individually, but when we come together with the right methodology, it can be multiple voices coming in and weighing in. Not to say that some of the other ones that are out there aren't objective too, but this isn't just a first mover brainchild. This is a brainchild of many things. We're just obviously a loud and obnoxious voice for its benefit.
At least loud, I won't call it.
My wife would say obnoxious.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you mentioned methodology, and Julie, I think you've been involved with this with Chris, so I'd love to kind of dive into what that methodology actually entails.
Yeah, because you mentioned too, Chris, there is some subjectivity to this. I think that subjectivity goes across to when you're measuring ROI for improvements to PDPs. It's been something that's held back, like development of PDPs since the beginning. When you talk about methodology to kind of mitigate that subjectivity, I'm really interested in like the former educator who loves a good rubric here in the conversation. I'd love to understand more about how you try to standardize the method of measurement of best practice and everything across categories, but also across retailers.
It's a great question. So right now, the ENDCAPS have started. They are focused on 6 mega CPG category groups of subcategories so that we're getting a little bit of like for like insights across food and non-alcoholic beverage or beauty. Not to say that there isn't a lot of cross-pollination of best practices across categories, but just so that we're also comparing like for like, especially if they're at different levels of advancement or maturity in each category. We started in the US with Amazon PDPs, Walmart PDPs, and Target PDPs, not to exclude others, but because those 3 retailers and the US market are some of the more advanced pages in capabilities and also most comparable in the, I would say, the portfolio of capabilities available to you. We didn't feel it would be fair to rank a regional grocer against Amazon when they don't have the same, and then the brands can't be the best compared to one another as an overall best in class. But who's to say we're not going to add other retailers and then grade them on what they can be as well, right? What best in class looks like at each of their platforms. So there's a lot of room to grow here. We've also had a lot of markets say, what about Canada and the UK and Mexico? And we have roadmap for some of that too. So we're coming. We just launched. But from a methodology, once we get into those like for like retailers, like for like sets of categories, then it becomes, we did lay out a foundation where this can evolve because we know that best practices, right? Table stakes tomorrow are advanced today. So we have to keep moving the target. But essentially, we started with 6 sets of criteria. We have hundreds of data points that we're looking at, and they're all objective things. Do you have this or not? Is this present or not? In our grocery category, we just had hundreds of PDPs submitted by different agencies and brands across the space. It was quite cool to see all the different voices. I think there were only 2 CPGs that weren't represented. And the only reason I found out was because they didn't know about it until after the deadline. They will be in the next year as they committed to. There's some table stakes things like content completeness, which we all know is important. We assume completeness means accurate, right? I can't see everyone's salsify records to know whether that's the source of truth. But if ideally you're complete, and then also you've been SEO optimized to a certain degree, right? That we have a page worthy of being seen by a shopper and a page that can be seen by a shopper. And there are some very objective, qualitative or quantitative things that you can put in there first. Then what kind of the secret sauces that come into play are the next sets of criteria around shopper centricity. Did we actually design that complete and SEO optimized content to speak to the right audience we're actually trying to engage through that funnel? Did we integrate the appropriate social user-generated content in where we could, right? I mean, there's a lot of levels of crawl, walk, run that you can do there. Did we optimize for mobile devices? Sounds so basic, but a lot of times at work, we're on a laptop, and at home as a shopper, we're on a mobile device, on our smartphone. So we're not always thinking about that, and then not always aware when the retailer's app changes and the content changes in terms of how we engage. And the last one was growth incrementality, really applying, was this content designed to drive incremental sales? Was it driving a new person in? Was it communicating to a lapsed person to come back? Was it driving bigger baskets? Was it driving more trips? Was it a mix of a multiple incremental growth objectives? We had some other ones that are in the works to be added as things evolve, like how you tailor it to the specific retailer's site and their specific programs. Retailers do restrict some of that, so there are some brands doing that, but it's not across the board yet, but those are some best practices. We've also had some great suggestions from the community around accessibility and making sure like it's ADA compliant and things like that. So there's some really cool things that we're going to keep adding to make this as comprehensive as we can. But Julie, you mentioned one thing too. It's just one last comment. The ROI of all of this is a whole nother, because there's all this other noise going on. So all we can control are our leading metrics and our leading actions. Obviously, we want to look at ROI and the lagging metrics to see if the leading did something. But at the end of the day, we can only pull those leading metrics. So we're measuring those leading levers and the leading metrics qualitatively and quantitative to get to a set of shortlisted finalists that then the judges can then go in with a rubric and score at that next level of like a human looking through at the story, at the mobile readiness and stuff. We have a really nice, I would say, cadre of judges that are coming from different angles, again, that then pool together, give you a very objective view from lots of different areas of expertise.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think and we'll dive into each of those like shopper centricity, mobile readiness and stuff that you touched on there, Chris. But one of the things that I think is most exciting about creating this award from scratch is like you go in with a certain set of assumptions and then you see hundreds of PDPs and likely that set of assumptions changes in some regard. And so I'm just wondering if you had to highlight anything that was surprising about this process or where your perception of the industry and where it's at has changed. Like, does something come to mind from now that you're on the other side of the first round of awards of what that looks like?
Having been on the brand side, on the e-com side, having done digital shelf hands-on myself back in early 2010 and 11, in the early days before there were agencies who could help you and tools, we were like photoshopping our own images and doing stuff. I go back to early days of digital shelf. I mean, like we're going on year 15 now. Everyone is their own mini expert in their own way. I'm not more of an expert than any other person, but I care about this. I want to advance it. So I just come from a place of humility. But what was interesting to see with so many hundreds of PDPs and tens of food and beverage brands submitting is that I think the best way to say this was some brands were leveraging many best practices. No brands were leveraging most of the best practices. So even the winners who we thought were amazing, still we could spend hours helping them figure out how to make it even better. Mm-hmm. And that's before we figure out about like, where does the future go with Amazon Rufus and AI, before the things that aren't even completely rolled out yet as future implications, just based on the best practices that we saw, to your point. And it was interesting to see a lot of brands submit their best pages and realize that their best might have been more of a walk compared to like in a crawl, walk, run. Mm-hmm. And that's not against them. It was like why we want to see a broader view of all players, even outside our categories, because sometimes what we think is so amazing in an echo chamber isn't as amazing as a peer who isn't compete. Maybe we're the best in our category, but in a category just across the aisle, so to speak, proverbially and literally, we're actually not as far along, right? And that's why we like this ENDCAP approach too with different categories, because maybe if I'm in food and beverage, I said, man, I have a long way to go to be best in class. But then I went to the beauty one and I saw what beauty's doing and they're years ahead of me. I can just go ahead and jumpstart and move to that next level. And then on the next ENDCAPS for grocery, I'm going to be beauty level. or I'll be able to borrow something cool they're doing that maybe I didn't think of doing before because I'm not in beauty. I always like to spirit walk the shelf to see what others are doing outside of my obvious competition set. And I think this opens up a chance for people to do that too in a fun way that celebrates the best practices.
On that note, what you're seeing brands do and speaking to it, one of the pillars or best practices areas that you mentioned was shopper centricity. Could you kind of bring that to life and describe what you saw brands doing and incorporating into their PDPs that really spoke to like, this is shopper centricity at its finest?
That's a great one. So we have a rubric. So if I'm paraphrasing our rubric, and so I don't want anybody to think there's less science in there because there's as much science as we can bake in as of today. And we're going to keep improving the science because we know human science is only as far as we've come in our development as a species. But we are constantly updating it with feedback and new data points, which is exciting. But the way we were looking at shopper centricity, if you teased out pieces, were things as simple as like, how consistent was the visual content? There are some brands that have like, they have good content, but there's no visual connectivity to it. It's like every image and or the above the fold versus below the fold look like they came from two different brands. Great content, not part of the same story. Don't look like they're part of the same story. So it could be something as simple as consistency, visual consistency. There was also, but maybe the more exciting part was looking at some of the questions we use in our rubric that then we have scores against are like, first of all, who is the content talking to? What does that person need to know? And is that information in the content at all? How are they telling that story of the content? Just because you have it doesn't mean it's told well. Reading the encyclopedia is good. It's got all the information, but it's not a story I can engage with easily. Obviously, then the awards are helping us identify that last question is anyone doing this better within the space? But within that, how are you telling the story? There's other questions, right? And we looked at this too, like both for bullet points, enhanced content, and carousel images, each one almost its own mini experience, right? Some shoppers only look at one versus look at all of them, but people in milliseconds are trying to determine when they're looking at any of your content, what is it? Is it for me? I.e. going back to who am I talking to? Does it work or do the thing it's supposed to do for me? And then all that other information, all the other unique selling proposition points, features, all come after, right? What's always interesting is when you look at some of these amazing pages, and some of this might have just been hey, we had it in the right order, but it didn't get loaded up correctly when it's syndicated, or the retailer changed something. That's part of digital shelf being a practice and not a project. You're always auditing to make sure the storyline, because what's so funny is it'll be like, here's product X, is it for me? Then it'll mention a flavor, which maybe the is it for me question answered. It's something, it's more of just an extra feature later. Or a lot of times it'll be, what is it? It's a laundry detergent. Is it for me? Well, are you an athlete and need an extra heavy duty one? Then this is for you. Okay, good. Does it work? And we sell all these other products. That's not the answer to that question. Does it work? Was it's the number one recommended by weightlifters everywhere, or whatever the right endorsement is. I'm making this up, but I don't have extra milliseconds, sadly, as a human race, to spend on trying to figure out the right order of the story you didn't give me. You might have lost me, and I don't know why. I don't think shoppers are going to think, I don't think you told me that story in the right shopper-centric order. They're just not going to get the story. So then they're going to leave, or they're not going to pick you for some undefinable reason. But we can define that at least and get a flow. That's part of what you would look at if you were looking at media copy or something. You'd be trying to read, like, that's what every TV copy I ever developed on the brand side was going through that same rubric of like, what is it? What's the claim? What's the reason to believe? What are all the extra things, the extraneous things that are helpful, but not the most important selling points? So it's things like that that we were then auditing for within shopper centricity. And what's cool is very quickly when you're looking at lots of players in the subcategory, you can see what would a soup story be? What would be a chip story? And it's okay if your story isn't the same, because you might be Pringles versus Doritos and you have a very different story, but it should still flow in that order, even though your points might be a little different than your competitor's point. So we use that kind of rubric with, again, very objective point criteria to score. So then we could get it to the point where then the judges are looking at real stories and saying who did this the best across categories collectively.
One of the themes that I've heard you say a lot, Chris, and you just brought up now that kind of underpins this whole thing is that idea of digital shelf being practice and not a project. And I feel like that particularly applies to the idea of mobile optimization, right? A lot of us, I think, thought like, oh, mobile optimization, it's like, can I read my title on mobile? Do I have an infographic? Check. it's mobile optimized, right? I'm wondering, I think your awards do a good job of moving forward in sophistication and what we consider to be mobile optimization and the trends that you feel like really stood out from the brands that you saw that moved beyond just like, yeah, we got the right amount of characters,
To be fair, some of it is, I don't want to jump over that basic hurdle, right? That's kind of part of like content completeness, but there's like a foundation in mobile readiness. Hey, do I have the right number of characters? Knowing that a lot of retailers truncate titles on mobile, were the right pieces of content wherever I had influence, where I could actually see them as a shopper. The algorithm will see it. The human didn't see gluten-free in your title if it was in the ... part of the title, right? And maybe that was why they were choosing you. So if it's not in the title and they can't see it in a feature and it's not in the image somewhere, you might miss somebody looking for very specific gluten-free options based on their allergies, right? Or their preferences, right? So some of it is some simple things like that. Some of it is also, again, the mobile hero image development, right? Again, there's a science to that and an art to it, right? There's some GS1 industry best practices. Not all retailers let you do that. Amazon is probably the most restrictive of the three that we're judging. Walmart is kind of in the middle. Target is the least, I would say, restrictive. And it was funny even to take some of the brands that submitted pages of the same SKU across all the retailers, and you could see like, hey, where I could do the most on Target, I had my feature and my flavor and my size and a really cool iconography in that mobile hero image, but where on Amazon I can only have the product outside the pack. But even that wasn't being done by a lot of brands. They weren't doing the most that they could do. And I want to be fair to brands. Some of them might say, I was just lucky to have the budget to do a hero image at all.
Yeah, or get it uploaded to Amazon successfully
right.
one time.
Point being is people want to see, do I know what a can of Pepsi or Coke looks like? Yes. Do I still want to see it? Yes. So don't assume that I don't want to see it just because I know what it looks like inside your box. And it also allows part of your product to be plussed up a little bit in size. So there are some creativities where the box might be a little bit smaller as like a shadow behind the main product, but it helps take up some of the space. One cool thing though, on like Walmart, we saw some brands doing some cool things too, where they actually put like some of their, like for Infamil from Wreck-It, who won in every one of in the baby formula category for all three, they specifically had on Walmart, they had a really cool baby list endorsement call out from an industry recognized player who would add some credibility. So that was kind of a cool thing that they tested and learned and added in. One last little thing though, that was interesting though, that judges called out was even where brands were doing some creative things and adding call outs or little plus ups or whatnot, you have to be careful that on a mobile device that the overlay on the retailer's site of the magnifying glass or whatnot isn't covering up the very cool thing that you did. You were mobile ready, but you weren't mobile ready for that. And that changes, right? Retailers are changing their site. So what was amazing last month might need to be amazing in a new way this month because I can't see Baby List endorsing your product because it's covered up by that little magnifying glass or their little badge or whatever that lips over the main hero image. So it's things like that that may seem like, oh gosh, it seems so nitpicky, but that's what excellence is being nitpicky. You might already be 98%. We just want to get those last 2% to get to 100 every single day. And they may change every single day.
No stress, nothing to it.
This should pay our job. We have stable jobs for a long time.
Exactly. I do think it is all this. Volatility has such a negative connotation, but I'm not coming up with another word. So if you guys have another word, let me know. But it is this volatility. It provides the energy. It provides the excitement of like, you can always be growing. You can always be improving. And I think that is exciting. I love that in our space. Not to use this as a segue, but segueing into an area relative to PDPs that I think is getting more and more focused now, especially as it really can engender customer confidence before they click add to cart, is UGC. Mm-hmm. That can be tricky given the variety of retailers and how you're able to leverage UGC, what it looks like on each of the platforms. What did you see in terms of best use cases of UGC on PDPs? And if you want to answer only in acronyms, that's also fine.
Again, I think you call that a very important thing. Every retailer currently requires or restricts certain things and could change what they open up or don't let you do in the future. Some of my most frustrating moments in life have been finding somebody who did something cool or borrowing a best practice. And then because I did it, someone saw it, and then they stopped me from doing it.
Yeah.
As soon as I found the loophole, then they close a loophole and then slap me on the wrist for finding the loophole. But yet my son actually hacked the firewall in his elementary school with a friend, but they actually got celebrated for finding the hole in the firewall, as opposed to maybe he's destined for greater things than his dad. But UGC has lots of tiers depending on what you're allowed to do. Yes, we want, obviously the basic is, do I have sufficient, adequate, compelling reviews on my pages, right? Those three retailers clearly have those. Amazon doesn't allow you to syndicate from other sources, but Target and Walmart do. Amazon typically had the scale anyway. Part of that is just, am I already endorsed where people are expecting to see the reviews? Then it's, maybe I don't have all the reviews, or I do, but because you won't look at all of them, hence why there's AI assisted reviews now, I'm going to pull one of the most relevant ones into my content and cite it as I need to legally, but cite a real review from a real consumer that maybe even answers one of those questions. If I only have 6 images and I have to answer, what is it? Is it for me? Does it work? Everything else, maybe the review is the, does it work? Sally from Minnesota says it's the best thing that ever happened to her, whatever the product is, right? But pulling that in, a lot of brands don't have a review in their content, or it's thrown in, but it doesn't actually add to the story. It's just like, I like it. Well, good. Why? Why do you like it? And you had that extra, again, I know legal doesn't want you to have things that make claims if they're not validated claims. That's fine. There's a lot of people saying nice things about your product that aren't claims. I love it for this use case, right? Because if I'm talking to those athletes, maybe I'm trying to find one that implies someone used that product, that laundry detergent, after a marathon. Calling those out and using those to help tailor the targeting of the content, but also the validation. I've seen some really cool brands pull in what I like to call quantified reviews. Qualified review is just Jordan said X. Julie said amazing. Quantified is where I said 98% of consumers who use this product said that this changed their life, or was the best dinner they'd ever eaten, or it was spicier than any other hot sauce they've ever used, or whatever it may be. What's funny is, as a brand, we used to do consumer research all the time with statistically significant audiences. We had those we could pull. Not a lot of brands pull those in to content to validate the does it work or extra information. So that was kind of I would say a walk or a run version of a review. Again, if you can pull in video content from influencers, that's helpful. We saw some challenger brands actually did some nice things where, again, I'm sure they had permission to do this because they have this at scale. And challenger brands do this innately because they have to. They have to use their small tribe of influencers to move them forward. But why don't the big brands who have millions of influencers do the same thing? There were a couple cool brands that actually had woven in, like, their Instagram influencers were all featured as almost like a wallpaper behind a message, but they had the real names and real, like, you would recognize them if you were followers of them, or might recognize one but not know the others. And wow, so many people love this product. So you don't always need a founder story to look like you're a challenger level brand. Every brand is a challenger. So I think there's some really cool things, simple things like that. One other one that was actually outside food and beverage, but I thought was really cool to pull in is, I don't see a lot of brands do this, but when they do, it's really powerful. UGC doesn't only have to be consumers. It could be, instead of just saying the number one pediatrician recommended brand or number one dentist, have an endorsement from a real dentist or a real nutritionist. Like, this is one of my favorite products because it's this and this and this, and it's also gluten-free. I'm just making whatever the message is. But yes, you have to get approval to do that, but get a review from a real professional. Yes, you're endorsed by everyone, but the specific one said this amazing thing about you. Those are some little ways that you can make UGC work for you. And again, every brand can do this, even the food and beverage ones that might say, well, I don't have a dentist in my industry. You have nutritionists, you have chefs, you have foodies. There are people out there who could be a smaller E-lister or F-lister, so to speak, on a list of celebrities that could be your UGC social influencer endorser. So it's thinking outside that box.
The thing you talk about, Chris, of like this whole story, and there's many ways to address the what is it and does it work and is it for me, that sort of thing. And then there's the everything else, right? That's like how to build next steps from there. And the last set of best practices that you touched on were around this idea of incrementality and designing PDPs to like build on just not only converting that initial set of customers, but then that next tangential set. What things did you see that like really piqued your interest around this idea of incrementality from a digital shelf perspective?
Most brands, I would say, I think naturally, unless they're like a single product brand, like they don't have a portfolio, they have no sister, brother products or anything, or parent-child relationship sizes or whatever, they're kind of standalone. But most brands have other products. And I would say most brands have generally understood the value of mentioning that they have these other products in their portfolio. Not all of them, though. Sometimes you're on a page and you're like, I love that you're talking to me about this product, but I'm also interested in your other flavors or variants or the complementary ones in your brand. And I know in the industry that you have them, but as a shopper new to you, I don't know that you have them. And I may never go look because you didn't prompt me to. But that isn't necessarily the first piece of content. There are some brands that literally, like I said, it's like, what is it? It's salad dressing. Is it for me? We have a lot of other salad dressings. You're like, no, but what about this one? This was the one I was on, right? I wanted ranch, not Thousand Island, right? They jump too quickly to trying to cross-sell me. Cross-sell me at the end once you've already hooked me on, I love what I'm seeing. Oh, and you have so much more? That's awesome. Most brands have kind of gotten the idea of cross-selling their other complementary products to build baskets, but there's still some work to be done there. I would say some brands, definitely within snacking, sweet snacks, salty snacks, have gotten good at trips and occasions. They kind of did this already with a lot of Super Bowl campaigns and back to school, but sometimes that content doesn't come back to their page. So you'll see a campaign for buy all these amazing snacks for the Super Bowl. And then you click through and you get to the page and they don't mention the Super Bowl. It's not a full funnel experience driving new occasions all the way through. When you get there, you've lost me a little bit. I still like your product, but now I'm not tying it back to the prompt you led me through on. I think there's room for more occasions, pairings. I would say the Bev Out category does this really well with pairings because they have to like show why you would use this Merlot with this versus the Chardonnay with something else. But they do some really cool things. And honestly, they have to be really creative because they're limited as a category. They can't pay retailers to do anything. So they have to be really creative. So you can borrow some best practices from Bev Out, even though they're less developed in e-commerce, they're actually more in how they present themselves on the digital shelf a lot of the time. So you can learn sometimes from people a few steps behind you too. What was interesting was this wasn't in the food and beverage space, and I'm not surprised because food and beverage is still a few steps behind some of the other CPG categories, but there was like a razor brand that did a really nice job of saying like perfect for first-time shavers. I've been shaving for a long time. Am I not allowed to use this? No, I can use this too, but it's a perfect one for a first-time shaver. So I don't feel excluded, but I'm not the main audience they're trying to go after. They're trying to go after new people to the category. What a cool way to be inclusive while also being exclusive at the same time. You can do that in your messaging. So we always have to remember about how do we attract new people to the page? And that can also be by, do I have comparison charts of what my product does versus the leading something brand? Again, you have to have legal approval on this kind of content, but a lot of brands are missing the stuff they have in their TV copy. We're 30 times better than the leading private brand. Okay, put that in your content. That would sell me on why I'd pay $2 more for you, but you didn't put that in there. Some of this is being full funnel of connecting all the way through your media to your page because there's some amazing content sitting there that you have approval to use. You just have to get it designed to fit a digital shelf experience.
This has been great. Obviously, a ton of great takeaways from the first round of the ENDCAP Awards with the grocery category. And right now, healthcare category is underway. And then there's the 4 other categories remaining. Where can brands go if they want to learn more about the ENDCAPs or see what the schedule is for the different category awards so that perhaps they could share? They might be the brand, the unicorn out there that hits all the marks.
Yeah, so what is awesome about the ENDCAPs is they are free to participate in. They are free to learn from. There's nothing selling at you. Obviously, it takes a few minutes to submit your PDPs for your category, and anyone can submit. If you're just a marketer who loves how your e-com team did the digital shelf or how your agency did it, submit them. If multiple people submitted the same PDP, we dedupe them, so they're only looked at once. But we'd welcome that because we want to make sure we're getting all the PDPs included in each of these categories. But you can go to ENDCAPS, ENDCAPS.org. It's a separate experience. We have all 6 categories listed. So grocery, healthcare, household, beauty, pet. I'm missing one.
Bev Out. There we go.
And grocery happened in 2024, but we'll bring it back in October this year because it'll be an annualized thing. And each one of those will have a page that opens up with all the details on how to submit the form. So the healthcare one is open. Household and baby will open up shortly as well because that'll be in March of this year. But it's all free to submit. Anyone can do it. It takes 2 minutes to do. It's the lowest hanging way to get a really cool distinction in this industry. You get a real award if you win. You get a digital badge you can show with your award on LinkedIn. You can make your parents proud, your company proud. And this validates all that amazing work that the agency teams and the brand teams are all doing on their shelf. I don't want to say no one's acknowledged before, but no one could acknowledge because there wasn't something to show. Because most of the time it's like my CEO went on my page and didn't see our product because he typed in the wrong keyword. Or she went to the wrong page, the wrong SKU that's out of stock, and that's not the one. Unfortunately, the perception sometimes is myth. Like, you've done all this amazing work. We want to make sure we're celebrating everyone. And then we have a summit at the end of every one of these waves where we not only announce the winners, we talk about the judges, talk about why they won. And then we have a playbook that comes from that with the latest insights on how you can win as well, because we want you to be able to win the next time too if you didn't.
That's amazing. Huge value, not only the accolades. I'm a big proponent of that. Call out what's good, but then the learnings and see how you can translate that going forward, because it's a process. It's not an end product. This is continual. You're always going to need to be updating. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate a new award in our space, one that makes me really, really excited. And it was great learning more about what you learned in the first round of the ENDCAP Awards. So thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you both for having me again.
Yes,
we know we'll have you back again soon.